Well, Supreme Court today has allowed celebrity podcaster and YouTuber Ranveer Allahbadia to resume uploading his podcast and shows on social media. The court has asked him to stop airing the podcast after a row over his crass remarks on Samay Rana's YouTube show a few days ago. But the court's remarks today came after YouTuber's petition saying that this is his only source of livelihood. Supreme Court has also wrapped the YouTuber on his plea in court but has asked him to let him continue with his show. In fact, the court said, and I quote, "Filthy language is in talent, free speech has limits." The court has also said that it is not in favor of censorship, but filthy language is in talent. The court has meanwhile asked Centre to consider drafting regulations on regulating social media and digital content, as it says that there is a need to balance freedom and morality. My colleague Nupur joins us with more details on this. Nupur, was this order expected? And also, what triggered this? Did Ranveer Allahbadia approach the court again saying that this is his only source of livelihood and that he should be permitted to host his show?
Well, yes, earlier, as you know, that Supreme Court had issued notices on Ranveer Allahbadia's petitions challenging the complaints against him and also seeking clubbing of FIRs. So previously, the Supreme Court had stayed his arrest while issuing notice to Centre and had sought Centre's response on his petition, and had also asked state polices, that is Assam Police, Rajasthan Police, wherever the FIRs are lodged, it had sought response from these state governments on his petition. So today, today the Supreme Court resumed hearing the same case. And while hearing the case today, Allahbadia prayed to the court that one particular condition which had barred him from, appearing on any show should be revoked, as it is a matter of his livelihood, and he has more than 280 people that he, pays salary to, and he requested the court to lift that particular restriction. And the Supreme Court, while taking all this in notice, it asked Ranveer Allahbadia to file an undertaking that he would not be resorting to such obscene remarks that he has made on India's Got Latent show, and he will maintain decency and morality in his own podcast show, and has thus allowed him to continue with his podcast show. So it is a relief to the YouTuber. Secondly, the Supreme Court today has asked the Centre, previously also it has asked the Centre to file its response on regulating online content and the issue of obscenity on content that is present on social media. So today the Centre also informed the Supreme Court that it is, in fact, interested in regulating this content. The Supreme Court has now asked Centre to come up with draft regulation and discuss it with stakeholders, including media and other relevant stakeholders, that seek their response. The Supreme Court said that they don't want to do censorship, but they said that there has to be some limit on the kind of content that is played up. And since people of all age group have access to this content that is freely available on online platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and other social media avenues, the Supreme Court has today, said that there is a need to balance a right to freedom of speech, that is a fundamental right, freedom of speech and expression, with the right, the morality of the society. And morality of Indian society is also very different from societies of the world. So these are very crucial observations from the Supreme Court, and it will now hear from the Centre in the next hearing its response on drafting new regulations to regulate this online content. So it is a big development in that sense.
Right. Thank you, Nupur, for joining us with those insightful details. We also have Satya Mule, who is an advocate in the Supreme Court. We have Asad Abbas, who is a political analyst. Thank you, both of you, for joining me on this broadcast. Satya Mule, to you first. How do you see the Supreme Court, in fact, asking the Centre to consider drafting rules? Because does this make it easier for the Centre? Are these, instructions by the court binding on the Centre? We already have laws in place. The implementation has always been a problem. But also policing or regulating online content which does not have borders, how is it going to work?
It is going to be extremely difficult. I believe the views given by Supreme Court are more of a directory nature, and they cannot be certainly construed as completely binding, because what happens is already there are certain restrictions in place, reasonable restrictions as we call them, under the Constitution of India on the freedom of speech, subject to public morality and so on and so forth. Having said this, what happens is there cannot be any kind of guidelines which explicitly state what is vulgarity and what is not vulgarity. We are venturing into a territory where we are trying to develop some kind of new legislation wherein we define certain terminology and bring them under the ambit of criminal law, or also bring them under the ambit of freedom of speech and expression and reasonable restrictions, thereby, creating a completely new arena which will regulate the OTT platforms.
Right. Asad Abbas, politically speaking, this has everybody, had problems with what Ranveer Allahbadia said, the kind of comments that he made. But clearly, a lot of us were of the opinion that criminal action is not something that people need to ask for at every offense that they take. Social outrage, social media outrage cannot be deciding criminal action against anybody who posts something on social media. Now that the Supreme Court is also asking the center to consider drafting of rules, how do you see this move?
Well, absolutely. I think with great power, there's great responsibility and equal accountability. There needs to be regulations on the same front, no doubt about it. But let us also understand that I'm sure Ranveer Allahbadia and also his counsel, Mr. Abhinav Chandrachud, welcome the court's decision. We also need to understand that his company employs over 280 people whose livelihood depends on the podcast that they produce. And also let us understand that no doubt Ranveer Allahbadia has accepted his mistake. He has profusely apologized for the same. But let us also understand that abusing him, calling for a bounty on him, also many of the people disguising themselves as patients appearing in his mother's clinic is all unfair. And I'm glad that the court also previously asked the state police to interfere and, of course, protect them. Also, we need to understand that Ranveer Allahbadia, over the course of several years, for Gen Zs, millennials, and millions of people across the world, has been a means of consumption of news, political science, communication, and so on and so forth. We also can't take away all the good work that he's done. Even Adarniya Pradhan Mantri Modi ji gave him the National Creators Award, the Disruptors of the Year Award. Also, let us understand that Union Minister Piyush Goyal ji also invited him to join politics. Smriti Irani ji, Dr. S. J. Shankar, so on and so forth. I think keeping the millennials in mind, the Gen Z in mind, YouTubers and content creators are a great form of medium. So therefore, I think there needs to be right regulations. Of course, freedom of expression, we need to understand, is not absolute. To err is human, to forgive divine. What he has said, he's agreed that it is offensive, it is wrong. But nevertheless, I think going ahead, if there is the right kind of regulations, rules coming in, I think nothing like it. Because
but Satya Mole, while many would see this as a closure of this episode, given that the Supreme Court has finally allowed Ranveer Allahbadia to continue with the show, this can also be the start of a new chapter. But when we talk about laws, we have already representation. The law against indecent representation of women. We do have BNS. We have parts of the IT Act. We also have the IT rules. There are many rules already in place. What would be your concern when it comes to the center drafting, an all-encompassing law when it comes to digital content? What are the things that they have to keep in mind to ensure that there's no duplication, there are no more laws, but the focus is on fewer laws but better implementation?
Well, of course, this is going to lead to opening of a Pandora's box. These kind of regulations will definitely want to bring in some kind of a regulator. And there will be a big question mark as to what are the definitions in context of these kind of regulations. Now, when there is always a debate, when, if we just look at recent past, when IT rules or data privacy rules were attempted to be brought in place, the same kind of questions arose as to who will be the regulator and who will define the depth of each of the subjects that we are talking about here. So who is going to define what is vulgarity? Who is going to define how much vulgarity is an acceptable vulgarity? Who is going to define what kind of vulgarity will be acceptable in India and what is acceptable abroad? And OTT platforms, for that matter, are global platforms. How are we going to proceed when there is no self-restraint in place? In this Ranveer Allahbadia case itself, we have seen that no self-restraint was demonstrated. So therefore, again, this will boil down to bringing in some kind of a regulator, and then this is going to lead to opening a new Pandora's box.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us, both of you, on this very important topic. Self-restraint, of course, is the key of any regulation, but that's one thing how digital content does not really abide by, and that's going to be a challenge not just for the courts but also for the centre, which has now been asked to draft rules on content regulation. Thank you so much for joining me on this discussion.